warm welcome to you all from The Curious Case. I'm Davis, your host for tonight, and I'm so happy you're here. Tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight? I always enjoy hearing from you. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new story. Now, let's begin tonight's mystery. It was a quiet morning in Street Mary Mead, the sort of morning where nothing hurried. The kettle hissed softly in Miss Marple's cottage, and the postboy whistled down the lane. At 11:10, she set out toward the village library, gloves buttoned, shawl neat, steps unhurried. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and old paper. She liked that scent. It meant memory. Mrs. Lenton, the librarian, smiled from behind the counter. "Returning the crimson clue, Miss Marple." "Yes, indeed," said Miss Marple, a bit far-fetched in parts, but quite sound about motive. She placed the book carefully on the desk. "Mrs." Lenton flipped it open, frowned, then looked closer at the title page. "That's odd," she murmured. "This one isn't in our records." Miss Marple glanced at the spine. The label was neat, the number precise. She shook her head slightly. Perhaps a cataloguing error. But Mrs. Lenton wasn't listening. Her hand had paused mid-turn. "Someone's left something inside," she whispered. A folded note rested between the pages. Yellow paper, crisp fold, precise handwriting. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles. The words were brief. "The next death will match this story." For a moment, neither woman spoke. Outside, a bicycle bell chimed down the lane, cheerful and out of place. Miss Marple unfolded the page further, eyes scanning the opening lines of the printed story. The first sentence read, "Mrs. Ellison died before nightfall." The librarian gasped softly. "Mrs. Ellison? From Brenton Hall?" "Yes," Miss Marple said quietly. "She tends the church flowers. I saw her only yesterday." Mrs. Lenton looked uneasy. "It must be a prank." Miss Marple closed the book. Her fingers rested on the worn cover, feeling the faint ridge of the embossed title. "Perhaps," she said, though pranks seldom choose their words so carefully. The church clock began to strike noon. 12 calm, measured notes drifted through the open window. Miss Marple turned toward the sound, thoughtful. The bells always seemed honest, steady, precise, never lying. She slipped the note into her handbag. "Best to return this one to the shelf," she murmured. "Mrs." Lenton nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. Miss Marple looked once more at the closed book. Her expression softened, but her eyes were alert. She knew Mrs. Ellison, and she knew how stories sometimes told the truth too soon. Miss Marple closed the book slowly. She knew Mrs. Ellison. The sea wind carried a damp sharpness that morning. Miss Marple drew her shawl closer as she walked. Brenton Hall stood at the edge of the village grey stone, ivy creeping over its walls. Once grand, now slightly tired. The lane curved through salt-wet hedges. Gulls cried overhead, thin and restless. Their sound always reminded her that nature never slept, it only watched. By the gate, the maid met her. "Good morning, Miss Marple. Mrs. Ellison is in the drawing-room." Her voice was polite, but her eyes darted toward the house as though measuring something unseen. Inside, the hall smelled faintly of lemon polish and damp coal. A clock ticked in the distance steady, too loud for such stillness. Miss Marple followed the maid in silence. "Mrs." Ellison rose from her chair near the window. A delicate woman, wrapped in a shawl, though the fire burned warm. She smiled, thinly. "How kind of you to come, Miss Marple. Sit, please." Miss Marple obeyed. "I was returning a book this morning," she said mildly. "Your name appeared in it, in quite an odd way. Mrs." Ellison's hand paused mid-air, teacup trembling. "Oh, how strange." Her voice tried for lightness, but her glance flickered toward the mantel clock. Its hands stood near 1 o'clock. She looked again, then too quickly away. The maid entered with a tray. The teapot rattled. A drop spilled across the linen cloth. Mrs. Ellison flinched. Miss Marple noted its small things always told larger stories. They drank in silence for a moment. Outside, a gust pressed against the windows. Ashes stirred in the grate. Miss Marple glanced toward the hearth. Among the embers, something darker curled and shrank. Not wood. Paper. She caught a faint scent, bitter, unmistakable. Not coal. Burnt ink and pulp. Mrs. Ellison followed her gaze and spoke too quickly. Old letters. Nothing important. Miss Marple smiled gently. Letters seldom burn unless they once mattered. A pause. The clock chimed once. Mrs. Ellison rose, her movements hurried. "I'm afraid I must see to the gardener," she said, voice thin. "Please excuse me." The maid reappeared to collect the tray. One of the cups still trembled slightly in its saucer. Miss Marple stood near the fire. The paper edge glowed faintly red, then turned black. A word remained before it crumbled. Chapter 2. She stirred the ashes lightly with the poker. The scent rose again, dry and final. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. That same smell lingered in the library that morning. She stepped back from the hearth. The sound of the clock filled the room again. A page was burning from the very same book. The day thinned quietly into evening. Shadows stretched across the hedgerows, long and still. Miss Marple walked toward the vicarage, her step measured, her thoughts arranged. The scent of baked bread drifted through the open window as she entered. The vicar, Reverend Cole, looked up from his papers with a warm smile. "Ah, Miss Marple, just in time. Mrs. Cole insists I not dine alone or grow too serious." She smiled faintly. "A vicar too serious is still better company than most sinners, I imagine." He laughed a short, kindly sound. They sat to supper. Soup. Bread. The comfort of habit. The lamplight flickered softly against the crockery. Conversation stayed light until the pudding came. Then, as often happened in quiet homes, something heavier slipped through the doorway uninvited. "I passed Brenton Hall this afternoon," said the vicar. Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. "Oh? Then you saw Mrs. Ellison?" "I did not," he said, "but I saw her visitor, a gentleman from London, by the look of him." He poured himself a little water. Tall, fair hair, dark coat. Spoke briefly with the gardener, then left by the cliff road. He seemed in some hurry. Miss Marple stirred her tea without looking up. "Did he call himself by name?" The vicar shook his head. "No, but I thought it odd he took the side path, not the main gate." She nodded slowly. Perhaps he preferred to be unseen. They spoke no more of it for a while. The clock ticked in the corner, steady and unbothered. Outside, the evening deepened to grey. At 7, Miss Marple took her leave. The air had turned cool, the lane faintly misted. In the distance, a carriage rolled somewhere along the coast road. A sharp screech of wheels broke the stillness, then silence again. She paused at her gate, listening. Only the sea answered low and steady against the cliffs. Inside her cottage, she lit a small lamp and opened her notebook. One page. A single line. "Visitor from London, left by cliffs." She set down the pencil. The house was quiet except for the faint crackle of the fire. The peace of the moment should have been comforting, yet something beneath it pulsed attention, slow but sure. At 9:30, the vicar's bell rang across the village once. Then again. Urgent. Unplanned. Miss Marple stepped out, shawl tight, eyes alert. A young man ran down the lane from the sentry. Vicarage. "Miss Marple, there's been a sound." From the cliffs. They followed the path together. The sea below was a black mirror. The air carried a strange echo, half cry, half wind. A lantern flickered near the edge where footprints ended. One set only, the rest washed away by the tide. The vicar stood beside her, breath short. Was it her? Miss Marple looked toward the dark water. The tide rolled in, cold and patient. No answer came, only the endless rhythm of the waves. By the time they reached the shore, only the wind answered. The tide had already begun to turn when they found her. Mrs. Ellison lay near the rocks, half in shadow, half in foam. The waves reached for her gently, as though unsure they should. The constable stood a few yards off, cap in hand. He cleared his throat once. "Looks like she slipped, Miss Marple. Wet stones. Treacherous things." Miss Marple didn't answer. Her eyes moved slowly over the scene. The hem of the woman's skirt was soaked, one shoe gone. A glint of gold at her wrist still caught the light. There was no wound, no bruise that spoke of struggle. Only the faintest scent, caught when the wind shifted. Bitter, sharp, bitter almonds. She had smelled it once before long ago, in a different case. Cyanide. Clean, swift, deceptive. The constable crouched near the rocks. She might have taken ill, perhaps. The sea air, the heart. He stopped, glancing toward Miss Marple as if seeking approval. She gave none. Instead, she bent down, not too close, her eyes narrowing slightly. The ground was smooth except for one small patch of disturbed sand. Not from a fall. From a heel turning outward, someone stepping back. She straightened, brushing her gloves together. "Best to fetch the doctor," she said softly. He nodded and hurried away. The gulls circled above, low and impatient. The sea whispered at the rocks, steady and endless. When the doctor arrived, he bent over, the body, murmuring his findings in the careful tone of men who disliked conclusions. Heart failure, perhaps, though there's an odor here. Faint. He looked at Miss Marple. She nodded once. "Bitter almonds," she said. He frowned, uneasy. "I shall take a sample. But yes, I see what you mean." She turned a little, her eyes catching on something half buried by sand. A scrap of paper, water-darkened but still clinging to form. She lifted it delicately between gloved fingers. It was torn the edge rough, as though ripped from a larger page. The print was faint but legible enough to read. Chapter 2. The Widow Falls. Her heart gave one small, quiet thud. The story from the library. The words were the same. Behind her, the constable spoke again, voice low. "Strange thing, her being found like this. A good woman. Kind. Never any trouble." Miss Marple slipped the torn page into her handbag. "Yes," she said quietly. "Kindness often meets its troubles second-hand." The wind shifted again. The scent faded. Only salt remained and silence. She turned toward the village path. Behind her, the doctor gave instructions. Voices moved about gently, like waves sorting stones. Miss Marple walked slowly, eyes down, thoughts measured. No hurry, no drama, just the shape of truth forming beneath the calm surface. The book had promised it. Morning came with the smell of toast and damp roses. The village woke slowly, but the talk began early. In street, merry mead, gossip brewed faster than tea. Miss Marple took her usual seat at the corner table of Mrs. Price's tea room. She never hurried her cup. People spoke more freely when they thought she wasn't listening. The clink of teaspoons filled the air a steady rhythm, like small bells. Voices murmured over scones and marmalade. The talk, as always, began with sympathy and ended in speculation. "Poor Mrs. Ellison," said Mrs. Price, wiping a saucer. "They say she walked too close to the edge. Such a gentle soul." Miss Hartwell leaned forward, voice low. "She wasn't alone that morning. My nephew swears he saw a carriage stop by her gate. London plates." Another woman nodded. "A visitor, yes. Mr. Sloane, I heard. Polite but distant. Wore gloves even indoors. Said he was writing a book." Miss Marple stirred her tea, her eyes mild. "Writing can make people very quiet," she said softly. No one noticed the faint smile that touched her lips. "Mrs." Price poured more tea. "They say he stayed at the inn. Never mixed much. But the librarian told me something odd." Miss Marple looked up gently. "Oh?" Mrs. Price lowered her voice. "Mr. Sloane borrowed 3 novels last week. Never returned them. Not a word. Not a page." "That's unlike him," said another. "Men like that educated men usually pride themselves on punctuality." Miss Marple nodded. "Indeed. Punctuality is a sort of armor, isn't it?" The group murmured in agreement. The sound of teacups punctuated the quiet like small exclamations. Someone mentioned the titles, trying to remember. One was The Widow's Garden, I think. Another had something about a doctor. The physician's secret, perhaps. Miss Marple looked down into her tea. Steam rose softly, curling like a question. She spoke almost to herself. Stories have curious ways of returning, even when their readers do not. Mrs. Price laughed gently. Oh, Miss Marple, you do make everything sound mysterious. Miss Marple smiled. Only when it already is. The bell above the door jingled. The librarian, Mrs. Lenton entered holding a small notebook. She spotted Miss Marple and came over at once. I thought you'd want to know, she said. I checked our records this morning. Those 3 books, mister? Sloane borrowed. They weren't ordinary novels, all printed privately. No publisher's mark. Old paper, new bindings. Miss Marple looked up, eyes sharpening slightly. Private editions can hide many truths, Mrs. Lenton. They tell us who wanted the words seen and who didn't. The librarian hesitated. There's something else. One of the titles, it wasn't fiction at all. The teacups fell silent around them. Miss Marple waited. Mrs. Lenton leaned closer. It carried a name, a local one, The Death of Mrs. Finch. Miss Marple set down her cup. Her tone stayed gentle, but her mind was already turning. One of those titles matched another village's name. The next morning brought a cool wind and pale light. Miss Marple walked toward the doctor's house, shawl pinned close. The sea air felt sharper that day, as though listening. Dr. Finch's cottage stood behind the post office. Clean curtains, polished bell, nameplate shining. He was a careful man, perhaps too careful. She knocked once. He opened the door himself, spectacles glinting, expression polite but guarded. Ah, Miss Marple, nothing serious, I hope? She smiled. No illness, doctor, only curiosity. He led her to the small waiting room. The air smelled faintly of ink and disinfectant, the odor of someone who writes as much as he heals. He offered tea. She declined. I came, she began, because your name appears in a story. He blinked. In a story? Yes, she said softly. A title in our library. The Death of Mrs. Finch. Rather a grim choice, wouldn't you agree? He gave a short laugh too quick. Good heavens, Miss Marple, surely not about me. Probably some coincidence. Probably, she said. Her tone was mild, but her eyes stayed steady. He walked to the desk, pretending to tidy papers. The sound of pen nibs and folded prescriptions filled the silence. When he sat, his hand brushed the inkwell. A small stain spread on his thumb, dark, familiar. He picked up his pen. You know how villages are. Always a tale to tell. Miss Marple nodded. Indeed. But some tales begin before the telling. He tried to sign a prescription, but his hand trembled. The pen scratched. Ink dotted the page like nervous breath. He blotted it quickly. Unsteady this morning, he muttered. Too much coffee. She leaned forward slightly. The handwriting in that story. The notes in the margins. They match yours rather closely, Doctor. He froze, then forced another laugh. Surely you don't imagine I spend my evenings writing thrillers? I imagine very little, she replied gently. I observe. His face paled a little, though he kept smiling. Whoever wrote that nonsense used your pen, she finished. For a moment, the clock ticked too loudly. Outside, the wind pressed against the window with a hollow sigh. Miss Marple stood. Well, I won't keep you. Patients must come soon. He rose at once. Of course. Always busy here. He reached for his coat sleeve, hiding the ink-stained hand. At the door, she paused. Stories, Doctor, are dangerous things. They travel faster than truth and live longer. He didn't answer, only watched her leave, still holding the ruined prescription. The scent of ink lingered behind her, sharp, metallic, permanent. She knew that smell. It was fear disguised as writing. As she stepped into the street, the first drops of rain began to fall quiet, deliberate. Fear leaves fingerprints, even in pen strokes. The inn at Brenton sat just beyond the green. A quiet place. Wood beams. Low ceiling. The kind of room where secrets preferred to whisper. Miss Marple entered after luncheon, greeted by the mild scent of coal smoke and furniture polish. Behind the counter, Mr. Drew, the innkeeper, nodded. Good day, Miss Marple. Looking for tea? Not today, thank you, she said. I was hoping to find a guest. a Mr. Sloane. Mr. Drew hesitated, wiping his hands on a cloth. Polite gentleman. Keeps to himself. Room at the end of the Brome. Hall. Always writing, that one. Ah, Miss Marple murmured. Writing often reveals more than intended. She climbed the narrow stairs. Her steps were soft, steady, unhurried. A door stood slightly ajar. Voices drifted, one male, one uncertain. When the younger voice faded, she tapped gently. "Come in," said a calm tone. Mr. Sloane stood by the window, tall, impeccably dressed, shoes polished to mirror shine. A faint smell of ink and tobacco clung to him, the scent of deliberate men. "Miss Marple," he said, smiling, "I've heard of you. You have a reputation for attention." She inclined her head. "Attention is simply another form of courtesy, Mr. Sloane." He gestured toward a chair. "Then let us be courteous together. May I offer tea?" She declined with a polite shake. "I won't stay long. I was curious about your books." His smile deepened, practiced. "Ah, yes. I'm an antiquarian bookseller. Rare editions, private press, that sort of thing. I'm in Brenton to make a valuation." "How interesting," said Miss Marple softly, "though one wonders what valuable books might be hiding in our small parish." He gave a short laugh. "Indeed, but treasures appear in the strangest places." On the table behind him lay several volumes, plain covers, blank spines. No dust, no library marks. Clean, recent. Her eyes lingered, but she said nothing. Silence drew more truth than questions. Sloane moved to pour himself tea. The motion revealed his hand. A ring. Gold. Engraved. Small crest of a rearing horse beneath a crown. She recognized it at once. Brenton Hall. "Lovely ring," she said lightly. He glanced down. "Family piece," he replied too quickly. "My grandmother was connected distantly to the Ellisons." "Ah." Her tone held nothing but politeness. "Then perhaps your visit is less about books and more about inheritance." He smiled again, thinner now. "Perhaps both. The past has value, Miss Marple, in every form." The clock on the mantel ticked precise, loud, marking his hesitation. Tick, tick, tick. Every pause a sentence he didn't finish. Miss Marple rose. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Sloane. I do enjoy meeting men of letters." He bowed slightly. "The pleasure is mutual." At the door she turned once more. The clock still ticked, steady as gilt. Her eyes moved from his polished shoes to the closed books on the table. The air in the room felt too still, as though words were hiding. He wasn't selling stories. He was writing them. The afternoon was grey and windless. Brenton Hall stood silent, its windows shuttered against the sea breeze. Miss Marple had been granted permission to sort Mrs. Ellison's personal papers, a practical courtesy, the constable had called it. The housekeeper led her upstairs, second door to the right. Mrs. Ellison's room smelled faintly of lavender and paper dust, a scent that spoke of order and secrets kept neatly folded. The curtains hung half-drawn. On the dresser lay a stack of unopened letters tied with ribbon. The bureau drawers were closed but unlocked. Miss Marple began quietly, her hands precise, respectful. Top drawer handkerchiefs, carefully pressed. Second bank papers and receipts. Third correspondence. She paused there. Among the envelopes, one was different, unsealed, addressed not to family or friend, but to Dr. E. Finch. The date 1 week before Mrs. Ellison's death. Miss Marple hesitated. A private letter was not hers to read. And yet, when death had come, silence lost its right to protection. She unfolded the paper. The writing was firm but uneven. A woman under strain. "If Sloane publishes the truth, we are both ruined. You must stop him before it is too late." The ink had bled slightly, as if written in haste. At the bottom no signature, only a trembling initial. E. Miss Marple sat back, the paper resting on her palm. The faint smell of old ink rose, bitter as regret. The words carried weight, not fiction but fear. She read again. "Not if he writes, but if he publishes." The distinction mattered. Whatever Sloane knew had already been written. Her eyes turned toward the dressing table, a blotter. a single clean sheet beneath it. No drafts, no scraps. Unusual for a woman who wrote letters often. She lifted the blotter. Underneath, faint mirror impressions marked the pad. Reversed words, barely visible, pressed through from a missing page. Her eyes traced them carefully. He threatened the captain, too. The rest lost to pressure and time. She replaced everything exactly as she'd found it. The room felt heavier now, as though every drawer carried a secret heartbeat. Outside, the gulls called faintly. Their cries sounded distant, muffled by glass. The world beyond still moved, unaware of what had already begun here. Miss Marple folded the letter once more and slipped it into her handbag. She stood by the window for a long moment. The sea looked calm, deceptive, as truth often was before it surfaced. Downstairs, the clock struck 4. Soft, deliberate, like punctuation in a story that wasn't finished. She turned toward the door, voice low, more thought than sound. Mrs. Ellison wasn't afraid of death, she murmured. She was afraid of exposure. Her eyes lingered on the bureau one last time. The ink had faded, but the message had not. The book was not fiction, it was confession. The rain began just after tea. Soft at first, a polite tapping on the window panes. Then steadier, the way small truths insist on being heard. Miss Marple walked toward the library, umbrella neat, shoes crisp on the wet cobbles. The air smelled of damp stone and ink. Evening light turned the puddles to silver. Inside, the lamps were already lit. Mrs. Lenton looked up from her desk. "Back again, Miss Marple. You'll have read the whole parish soon." "Books are safer company," Miss Marple said mildly, "until they start telling the truth." The librarian smiled without understanding. Miss Marple moved toward the display table near the window. Her gloved hand brushed the covers, gardening in spring, village hymns, collected sermons. Then she placed a new one among them. A simple binding. Dark green cloth. No author. Title stamped in gold. The Doctor's Ending. Inside, she slipped a folded note. Just 2 words, he knows. No signature. No explanation. The ink was still wet when she closed the cover. It left a faint scent, sharp, metallic, purposeful. She arranged the book neatly, spine aligned, title visible. Then she took her usual seat near the window, pretending to browse through an atlas. Outside, the rain fell harder. Each drop struck the glass like a heartbeat. The rhythm helped her think. She didn't need to search for guilt. Guilt always found its way toward warning. At the far table, 2 schoolgirls whispered over homework. A farmer returned a stack of magazines. No one else entered. Then footsteps. Measured. Polished. Mr. Sloane. His hat carried raindrops, his coat freshly brushed. He nodded politely to Mrs. Lenton and walked between the shelves with quiet confidence. Miss Marple's eyes stayed on her book, though her mind did not. He paused near the display table. A brief glance, then another. His hand hovered above the books. Mrs. Lenton called from the desk. "Mr. Sloane, we close in 10 minutes. He smiled, polite as ever. "Of course." But he lingered. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly. The girls packed up and left. The room grew still, except for the whisper of rain. Miss Marple turned a page, not reading. From the corner of her eye she saw motion. A hand. Smooth. Deliberate. The green book lifted from the table. Mr. Sloane slipped it under his arm. He didn't check it out. He didn't even look back. He simply tipped his hat toward the librarian and walked out into the rain. The door closed softly behind him. The bell gave a single note, bright, final. Mrs. Lenton sighed. "Strange man. Always takes books. Never returns them." Miss Marple folded her umbrella. "Yes," she said gently. "But this time he's borrowed something heavier." The rain eased to a slow patter. She looked toward the empty space where the book had been. Someone picked it up before closing time. Night settled early over Brenton. The rain had not stopped. It came in thin silver lines, steady, unbending, the sort that filled silence without apology. Miss Marple stood beneath her small black umbrella outside the library gate. The lamps along the street glowed softly, halos in the mist. She had waited until the last light inside the library went out. Mrs. Lenton locked up and walked away, but Miss Marple did not leave. On the wet pavement, she saw them footprints. Clear, pointed, freshly pressed. A man's shoes, well kept, polished enough that rain slid clean from the leather. They moved away from the library and down toward the lane that led to the doctor's cottage. She followed slowly. Her umbrella tapped the ground in rhythm, one step, one thought. Each print gleamed faintly in the lamplight before vanishing into shadow. The air smelled of wet earth and old leaves, the sort of smell that always came before truth decided to appear. She turned the last corner. The doctor's windows glowed faintly through the mist. A candle flickered behind the curtain, uneven, restless, like breath held too long. She stopped short of the gate, half hidden beneath the yew hedge. Two shapes moved behind the glass. One tall, restless pacing. One still, seated. Their shadows argued on the wall, jerking back and forth in uneven rhythm. Though no words reached her, she felt the heat of tension even from the path. Gestures sharp. One hand raised. Then the candlelight. Swayed as though caught by wind or fear. She took one step forward. The sound of her foot on the gravel was swallowed by rain. The tall figure moved suddenly, leaning close to the seated one. Then stillness. A moment later, the curtain rippled. The flame inside the room flickered low, then vanished altogether. Darkness folded over the cottage. She waited. No voices, no motion. Only rain, soft and endless, washing sound away. The street lay empty. A clock in the distance struck 9, its echo faint and weary. Miss Marple stayed where she was, her breath slow, her eyes patient. Then the door opened. Light spilled out briefly. Not candlelight now, but lamplight from the hall. A man stepped out, closing the door behind him. Mr. Sloane, hat on, coat buttoned, head low. He walked briskly, boots splashing through puddles without pause. He did not look back. Miss Marple's eyes followed him until he disappeared round the corner. Then she looked again toward the darkened window. No second figure moved. No light returned. The rain fell harder now, heavy enough to blur footprints into nothing. Her umbrella dripped quietly as she turned back toward the village. Each step felt slower than the last. At the cottage behind her, the single candle guttered once, then died completely. Only one shadow left the room. Morning broke pale and uneasy. Mist hung low over Brenton, softening the rooftops, blurring edges. The church bell rang once too early for comfort, too steady for peace. By 8, the news had spread. Dr. Finch was dead. Miss Marple arrived quietly, escorted by Constable Greaves. The doctor's cottage smelled of stale air and ink. His desk lamp still burned, a small island of light in the gloom. Nothing in the room looked disturbed. Books lined the shelves in precise order. Pens stood upright in their jar. And there, beside a blotter of half-written prescriptions, sat a cup, cocoa, untouched but for a faint rim of brown near the edge. Miss Marple stepped closer. The scent reached her first sweet, then bitter, unmistakable, bitter almonds, the same ghost that lingered by the sea. The constable shifted behind her. Doctor must have felt faint, sat down and never rose again. She nodded slightly. Yes. How fortunate that he chose to write until the very end. The constable frowned. Write? She pointed to the blotter. Ink still glistening. Neat handwriting. A single line. Centered. Deliberate. Chapter 3, The Doctor's Fall. Constable Greaves read it twice. Now that's a queer thing to jot down before dying. Miss Marple said nothing. Her eyes moved to the pen beside the sheet. No smear, no splatter. Someone had written with care. Someone who wasn't trembling. She lifted the blotter gently by its corner. The underside was damp, edges crisp with new ink. A mark beneath pressed letters faintly reversed. She held it toward the light, traced the outline with her gloved fingertip. Another phrase, written before the top page, replaced it. He deserved it. Her hand stilled. She looked toward the cocoa cup again. Steam had long since gone, but a thin film clung to the surface, brown, unbroken, precise. Who found him? She asked softly. The constable shuffled. "Mr. Sloane, ma'am. Said he'd come to deliver a message. Knocked, got no answer, looked through the window, claimed he saw the doctor slumped." "Very helpful of him," she murmured. She set the blotter down and stepped back, her gaze sweeping the desk. 2 letters stacked neatly at the corner, one addressed to the coroner, one to no one at all. Unsealed. Empty. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles. "Would you kindly ask that no one touches the desk until I've finished here?" The constable nodded and left to fetch a photographer. She leaned in once more. The ink glistened faintly, still too bright for a man dead since dawn. The room was cool, the air undisturbed. Yet the writing was fresh. Someone had been here. Someone who knew exactly what to leave behind. Miss Marple's fingers rested on the corner of the blotter. Her voice was quiet, almost kind. Poison and penmanship both reveal intention. The window latch clicked softly in the breeze. Outside, the rain began again, washing nothing clean. Miss Marple turned the blotter. Fresh ink. Someone had watched him die. Afternoon settled heavy over the village. Clouds pressed low. The air felt thick, thoughtful. Miss Marple sat by her parlour window, papers spread across the table in tidy rows. Every note, every scrap, every page that should not have existed. The library ledger lay open beside her. Ink faded, but the pattern spoke clearly enough. 3 borrowed books, 3 deaths. Each title reflected its victim like a mirror too precise to be chance. She read the first. The Widow Falls. Mrs. Ellison, poison, bitter almonds. The second, The Doctor's Fall, Dr. Finch, poison again. Same signature, same hand. Her gaze moved to the last entry. The writer's end. No borrower's name. Only the date left blank. The clock ticked faintly behind her. Measured. Patient. Each sound landed like thought made visible. She leaned back, eyes half closed, reviewing the facts in order. Mrs. Ellison had feared exposure. Dr. Finch had trembled at his own handwriting. Mr. Sloane had collected the stories that sealed their fates. Yet the letters, the pages, the words themselves, they all came from one mind. Someone who believed writing was safer than confession. Someone who understood that printed lies could hide printed truth. Her knitting lay untouched on the chair. She preferred threads of reason tonight. They tangled less. She reached for the torn fragment from the beach, Chapter 2. Then for the blotter from the doctor's desk, Chapter 3. Her lips tightened slightly, each scene written before the act, each title becoming prophecy. She took out the library's missing record. Blank spaces stared back where borrowers' names should be. 3 blanks, written by the same steady hand, the same ink, the same small flourish beneath the letter S. Her eyes narrowed. Mr. Sloane had left no address. He'd registered under initials only M.S. She traced the letters with her fingertip. M.S. Manuscript. The rain began again, gentle against the glass. Its rhythm matched the ticking clock. Tick, drop, tick, drop, the sound of patterns repeating. She rose and crossed to the bureau, opened her notebook, the one she reserved for logic. Page 1. The killer copies fiction to mask intention. Page 2. Each death written first, lived second. Page 3. The next title predicts the next victim. She wrote the final line slowly. Only 1 chapter remains. Then she stopped. Her pen hovered above the page. One thought pressed quietly into the stillness. If the pattern continued, the last chapter must already be written. But by whose hand? She closed the book, hands steady, eyes clear. The truth was nearly done forming. Every lie had reached its punctuation mark. The clock chimed 6. 3 long notes, then silence. She listened until it faded, as though waiting for an echo that didn't come. Only 1 chapter remains the writer's end. The afternoon passed quietly. A still kind of quiet, the kind that listened back. Miss Marple set the tea table herself. Lace cloth, 2 cups, 1 pot. But not tea today. Cocoa. The scent drifted gently through the room, warm, faintly sweet, the kind that softened suspicion. She adjusted the tray twice, more out of thought than fuss. Then she waited. At precisely 4, the doorbell rang. Mr. Sloane was punctual, always punctual, the mark of men who plan too much. She opened the door. "Miss Marple," he said, smiling. "How very kind of you to invite me. I rarely decline tea with a lady. Of your reputation. Flattery," she said softly, "is rarely as sweet as cocoa." He laughed, smooth and sure, stepping inside. His coat carried the scent of rain and old paper. He removed his gloves carefully, laying them in exact alignment on the hall table. "Please sit," she said. He obeyed with polite ease. The chair creaked once, then stilled. She poured the cocoa slowly, evenly. The sound filled the space between them like quiet punctuation. He watched her hands, eyes steady, assessing. "Such a small village," he began. "Yet so many stories. I imagine it must keep you entertained." "It does," she replied, "especially the ones that write themselves." He tilted his head. "Ah, you mean gossip." "Not quite." She placed a cup before him. "Some stories are written on paper first. Others, well, they're written in people." He smiled faintly. "A poetic view." Miss Marple folded her hands. "I've been rereading those curious titles from our library. The Widow Falls. The Doctor's Fall. Rather tidy sequence, wouldn't you say?" His smile didn't falter, but his eyes shifted. "Coincidences, perhaps. Fate has a fondness for irony." "Fate," she said quietly, "rarely types her endings." A pause. The clock ticked once. Outside, a bird called, sharp and brief. She leaned forward just slightly. "Curious how stories imitate life. Or is it life imitating you, Mr. Sloane?" The words landed softly like dust on glass. He said nothing. For the first time, his fingers twitched against the porcelain cup. She continued, her voice calm as ever. "I found Mrs. Ellison's letter, her warning, and Dr. Finch's blotter, the chapter titles, the ink, all from the same hand." He lifted the cup, masking his expression. "You've been thorough." "I try to be," she said. "Writers should never underestimate their readers." The room seemed smaller suddenly. The scent of cocoa felt heavier, sweeter. Miss Marple waited, hands folded neatly in her lap. He studied her still, controlled, then smiled again, slower this time. "You think me, the author, Miss Marple?" She tilted her head. "I think the pen has always belonged to you. I'm just here to read the ending." The cup hovered halfway to his lips. Steam rose gently, blurring his reflection on the surface. His hand paused. The clock struck 4:30. Each chime sounded like a question answered too soon. He froze before sipping. Silence settled thickly between them. The cocoa steamed faintly, untouched. The rain outside had softened to a whisper like the world pausing to listen. Miss Marple spoke first. Her tone was light, almost conversational. "It's curious, isn't it, Mr. Sloane, how words can wound?" He looked at her with faint amusement. "Stories rarely kill, Miss Marple. People do." "Yes," she said softly, "though sometimes the story comes first." His smile faltered. She leaned back, hands folded neatly in her lap. "You wrote, I believe, for a living. Ghostwriting, they call it. A modest trade for clever men. You once ghost-wrote Colonel Ellison's memoirs." He didn't reply, but the pulse in his temple moved once. She continued, calm as ever. "The Colonel trusted you. He gave you his accounts, his correspondence, his private papers. You found debts, forged a few more, and used them to supplement your income." He laughed short, brittle. "A village rumor, nothing more." "Not quite," she said. "Mrs. Ellison discovered your little fiction. She wanted to pay you off quietly, but you had another idea. You turned her confession into story The Widow Falls." He looked away, gaze steady but unfocused. Her voice softened further. "It was clever. No one suspected. When she threatened to expose you, you silenced her. A dose in the cocoa, perhaps, or wine. Clean, quiet, fitting for a widow's tale. Sloane's fingers tightened around the cup. The porcelain gave a small, betraying clink. And then, she went on, there was Dr. Finch. He had known of your forgery, hadn't he? He helped sign those papers. But guilt spoils partnerships, doesn't it? So you wrote again the doctor's fall. He looked at her now, the calm mask cracking just slightly. You think me a murderer, Miss Marple? I think you a writer too fond of endings, she said. She reached for the folded letter on the side table. Mrs. Ellison's handwriting, faint but legible. If Sloane publishes the truth, we are both ruined. She laid it before him. He stared at it, eyes narrowing. So, you've read everything. I have, she said. Even the last chapter, the writer's end. I imagine it's meant for you. For the first time he smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're bluffing. Miss Marple lifted her cup, sipped, and placed it down gently. Writers, she said, often forget who reads the draft before publication. He looked down at his cup. The surface of the cocoa shimmered faintly under the lamplight. His reflection bent with the steam. Poison? He asked quietly. She didn't answer. Her eyes, mild and blue, held his steadily. He exhaled once long, controlled. Then the smile returned, thin as paper. You've won, Miss Marple. She said nothing, only watched as his hand hesitated halfway to his lips. The clock ticked once, then twice. He looked at the cup and understood. He looked at the cup and understood it wasn't tea. Dawn came pale and thin over Brenton. The tide was low, the gulls restless. Their cries broke the stillness like small truths refusing silence. A motorcar waited outside Miss Marple's gate. Inspector Graves stood beside it, collar up, eyes tired. It's done, Miss Marple, he said. We've taken him. She nodded, shawl folded neatly in her hands. How did he seem? Calm, said the inspector. Too calm. Told me he'd simply written his ending early. Miss Marple sighed. Writers rarely know when to stop. The car door opened. Mr. Sloane stepped out between two constables. No struggle, no protest. His hat was gone, his hair damp with mist. He met her eyes briefly, a look not of hatred, but of quiet acknowledgement. Miss Marple, he said softly, you read too much. On the contrary, she replied, you wrote too honestly. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile people use when losing with dignity. Then he turned toward the car. The door shut. The engine coughed to life. The sound faded down the lane, swallowed by morning air. The inspector lingered. We'll find more evidence at the inn. Manuscripts, notes, maybe the drafts. I doubt it, said Miss Marple. Men like Mr. Sloane destroy their drafts long before they're caught. The inspector nodded. He tipped his hat and walked away. The motorcar's trail left thin lines in the wet road, soon washed clean by drizzle. Miss Marple remained at the gate for a while. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and damp grass. The gulls wheeled and cried again, as though reading the headlines before anyone else. By 8, the village had begun to stir. Windows opened, brooms swept porches, and voices low, curious, half-whispered, drifted along the lanes. Did you hear? The London man arrested. They say he wrote the deaths like stories. Imagine, murdered by a book. Miss Marple turned from the gate. Inside, her cottage felt still and kind again. She set her shawl over the chair and poured herself a cup of tea. Steam curled, gentle as thought. On the table, the library books lay stacked in order, all returned but one. Atop them rested a new edition, unmarked, unnumbered, bound in cream. She hadn't placed it there. She drew it nearer. Plain cover. No. Title. When she opened it, the pages were blank. Perfectly blank. She smiled a small, knowing smile. The next author always waits, she murmured. Outside, the first sunlight broke across the cottages, pale and uncertain. The gulls settled on the roofs, watching the quiet return. Miss Marple sipped her tea. Her eyes drifted toward the book once more, fingers tracing its smooth edge. Somewhere, another story was beginning quietly, inevitably. Another book lies on the return shelf, blank pages waiting. By afternoon, peace had returned to Brenton. The rain was gone. The air felt rinsed clean. Miss Marple sat by her kitchen window, kettle sighing softly on the stove. The world outside seemed smaller now, or perhaps quieter. She liked it that way. She set out one cup, one saucer, old habit. She always poured for company, even when there was none. The tea streamed smoothly from the pot, steady, golden. The sound filled the silence, gentle, familiar, almost kind. On the table lay her notebook, pages filled with dates, clues, and names, each line now closed, each mystery finished. She touched the page marked the writer's end, then turned it face down. "People imagine truth hides in secrets," she said softly. "It doesn't. It hides in sentences." The clock ticked, unhurried. A fly buzzed once against the window pane, then stopped. The village beyond the hedge hummed faintly, a cart, a dog, a bell. Life resumed, indifferent and honest. She lifted her cup. Steam brushed her face like breath. Her eyes softened, though her mind did not rest. "Fiction reveals more truth than lies ever hide," she murmured. "It's the safest disguise a guilty heart can wear." She smiled faintly, not out of pride but recognition. The pattern of human folly never changed, only the ink did. Outside, the sea shone pale and distant. A gull drifted overhead, unbothered, endless. Miss Marple finished her tea and closed the notebook. Her fingers left a faint mark on the cover, a shadow of warmth, already fading. Truth, like ink, always seeps through. Night settled gently over Street Mary Mead. The lamps flickered low. Shops closed. The village slept. At the library door, the postman paused. Rain still clung to his coat. He placed a brown parcel on the step, neat and dry. Mrs. Lenton found it in the morning. No note, no explanation. Just an address from New York, the Morning Star Press. She untied the string, paper rustling softly. Inside lay a single book, new binding, fresh ink. Title clear and calm, Whispers Across the Atlantic, by Jane M. And somewhere, another reader turns the first page.